Hi, welcome to Traveling Down, Biblical Archaeology for the 21st Century. I'm Gary Byers. This is Dr. Steve Collins, our resident slime ball.
Well, that's
Pretty funny, huh?
yeah. That's what it's gonna be today.
We're going to talk
We're
about
gonna talk
slime,
about
aren't we? Now, there's got that stuff kids play with and throw and, it's not that kind of slime.
No, biblical slime is more like asphalt or bitumen or just gooey mud.
Gooey mud stuff. There's a Bible story about that.
Yeah, there is a Bible story about gooey mud.
And it does happen to deal with our site. Chedorlaomer is biblical Sodom. There's a story in Genesis chapter 14, 4 verses 5, 4 kings from Mesopotamia versus 5 kings from Canaan, and one of them is the king of Sodom. And tell us the story.
Well, Chedorlaomer, who was sort of the head dude, he's the Elamite. He's the Elamite king, and he picked up some mercenary soldiers, I'm sure, sort of borrowing them from various kingdoms as he went over the Fertile Crescent to come down into Canaan to pay a little visit to a group of cities called the cities of the Kikar. These are northeast of the Dead Sea and the Kikar of the Jordan. This circle, this disc of the Jordan, a well-watered plain, and all these cities are there, thriving, doing well, and for a good number of years they had been paying tribute, taxes if you like, but Chedorlaomer had somehow imposed a tribute system on them where they were having to pay him. And then they decided to quit, stop. And Chedorlaomer said, well, we haven't received our tribute payments from these people for a long time. I think it's time to pay them a little visit. And so he gets his army, and as he comes over the Fertile Crescent, he's picking up armies. And we don't have time to go into this, but if you actually look at the words used and the ethno-linguistic values of those in terms of who these people are, you see that he's picking up people right over the Fertile Crescent. He's picking up a few mercenary soldiers from Amraphel, which I think is very clearly Hammurabi. He's picking up some others from for example, a Tidal, who's probably a Hurrian. That's an Indo-European name, a Hurrian king, or maybe a Hittite leader of some sort. And he brings all these mercenary soldiers from these various kings. And by the way, whenever in antiquity it says that this king attacked that city or this king marched in battle against this other king, it does not mean the kings were there. Now, Chedorlaomer may have been with his troops, or maybe he wasn't. It's just that he is the responsible party, and he's going to take credit for it, and so that's what you do.
So maybe none of those other kings, he might have showed up, but maybe none of the others went.
And I doubt if they did.
They just sent troops. Now,
exactly.
Why would I want to send troops with you for you to get your tribute? Why do I want to send my troops?
Because I'm going to pay you.
Ooh.
I'm
good with that.
Yeah, I'm going to drop a few shekels on you in order to let me borrow. And some of your guys just like to go fight. You always have these guys who like their annual Super Bowl sort of thing. And we got the time of going to war was when?
In the spring.
In the spring, you get all your winter harvests are all done. Your spring planting is all done. Now what are we going to do? Sit on our hands? No. Who are we going to go beat up on? That's what they say. And so they all pick up their swords and they get together and they all head off to go pick on somebody. And this is exactly what was happening. So here they come over the Fertile Crescent, all the way over Aram and down into the Levant. And here they come down toward the cities of the plain.
And they don't go straight across because of the desert.
The desert, yeah, you got to go over the Fertile Crescent. And so they drop down into Canaan and they go down the Transjordan. So they're going down the east side of the Rift Valley of the Jordan River, and they're picking off or, getting a little tribute from cities as they go. And they go down into the southern desert. Don't have time to talk about that, but we could make a little episode out of that. They went down to the southern desert in order to get copper. They went down to the copper mines, probably around in Nahas, down there, the Wadi Finan, in order to get copper ingots because they don't have to do anything to them. They've already been mined. They've already been smelted. It's just raw copper waiting to be stolen. And that's why they went down there. So they went down there in order to stop this thing. By the way, if you hear a little noise in the background, we are at the lab, and there's stuff going on, and people unloading stuff and loading stuff. But so don't worry about all the noise in the background. It just is what it is.
It's what it is.
They're not going to stop for us just because we're doing a little video, right? So anyway, so they go down into the southern desert of Paran, and it's hot down there, and they gather up their copper, and they head back up, and it says they come to go to Kadesh, which is just south of the Dead Sea, a little bit to the west, and then they, which by the way was a jumping off point for copper coming out of Timnah, and so they probably took the Timnah copper as well. Then they scooted up the west side of the Dead Sea to a place called Hazazon Tamar. Now the Bible tells us that Hazazon Tamar is En Gedi. It's En Gedi. And so they went to En Gedi, and by the way, there's a lot of waterfalls there, lots of really nice springs that are coming right out of the ground. And so here they come, and now they're resting. Maybe they wintered over there. It was a really nice place to be, lots of water. And then they continue to go north. Now here's what happened. The cities of the plain army, who are north and east of the Dead Sea, and Chedorlaomer is moving up the west side of the Dead Sea, and you don't want this larger army to be camped on your own doorstep. So you want, and this is typical, you want to engage them at a good distance. So the cities of the plain army decides to cross over the Jordan, go over to the northeast, the northeast corner of the Dead Sea, which the Bible calls the Vale of Siddim, or the Valley of Siddim, which is, they say, the Dead Sea. And by the way, how could the Valley of Siddim also be the Dead Sea? Because the Dead Sea levels fluctuate radically in antiquity. When it's up, it's the Dead Sea. When it's down, it opens up expansive beachhead, and it's the Vale of Siddim. And so the cities of the plain army decided to cross the Jordan River, come over to the northwest corner of the Dead Sea, be where modern Qumran is, okay, and to engage where the beachhead is very narrow between the hills and the water, and engage this larger army on a very narrow front, which is smart.
Yes.
This is what the Greeks did against the Persians.
Battle of
Thermopylae. But same kind of strategy. Mm-hmm. Well, great idea, didn't work. Okay. Good idea, but obviously the Chedorlaomer's army punched through them. So now they were just retreating as fast as they could. They want to get back to Sodom, get back to their cities, get inside the city wall, shut the gates, before they all get killed. So they're turning and they're running. It says many of them fell into tar pits.
Slime pits.
Now the old King James said slime pits, which is a pretty good translation. But a lot of later ones call it tar pits or bitumen pits. Here's the problem with that. Never in the geological history of the Dead Sea has there ever been anything like tar pits. There's not tar pits. You think of like the La Brea tar pits out and around Los Angeles. No, nothing like that ever around the Dead Sea. There is tar or bitumen that breaks off some very deep rock strata and floats up to the surface, but it's hard as a rock. And so there are chunks of bitumen, big ones, small ones, all mixed all in the gooey, slimy mud around the Dead Sea, but you'd have to mine it out. And so you'd also have to melt it and process it in order to make it gooey soft if that's what you needed from it. But it's hard as a rock, so there were no slime pits or tar pits to fall into. And by the way, we're talking about the difference between the Hebrew word hemar, which means asphalt bitumen.
That's the asphalt one.
Or chomer,
that's the clay one,
which means clay or mud or slime. And it's the same Hebrew word. The same 3 letters in each one, it's just that the vowels are different. Now the vowels weren't put in the Hebrew text until around the 10th century AD by the Masoretic scribes who wanted to invent a system of vowel, we call them points, little diacritical marks to mark the pronunciation of the words. For what reason? They wanted to preserve the pronunciation of the Hebrew. For non-Hebrew speakers, as they would learn Hebrew, they would know how to pronounce the words, and you need the vowels stated in order to do that. So that's what they invented it for. They invented it for the purpose of being able to pronounce the text. Here's the problem. Why did they point it or vowel it hemar as opposed to homer? It was their choice. They must have assumed somehow that this was tar or bitumen or asphalt. So they pointed it hemar. But if they would have known the geology and understood what the word really meant, it meant homer. They should have pointed it homer, because this is the word for bitumen, clay, mud, mortar.
Yeah.
Okay, and there are a number of places in the Old Testament where it talks about, and they use bitumen for mortar. No, they use if it's homer, it's, if you're using mud bricks and you fire them, then bitumen will help stick them together. But if you're using unfired mud bricks, you better not be using bitumen, because it won't stick. That's like trying to stick oil and water together. It does not work. So in this case, what are we talking about? We're talking about sinkholes. We're talking about sinkholes. Why? Because in Abraham's day, the level of the Dead Sea was as low as it is today.
Which is almost historic low.
Almost historic low. Yeah. Not totally, but almost. And when this happens, you get wide beaches, but the ground starts to fall away underneath, and these holes open up, and they might be, within a foot of the surface. You have a cavernous hole underneath the surface, and it hasn't broken through yet. And if it's only got 4 or 5 or 6 inches or a foot of slimy clay over the top of it, and you walk over it, what's going to happen? Kaboom, you're going down into that. And so what's happening is, as these cities of the plain soldiers were fleeing, having been routed by Chedorlaomer, they were running across this wide beachhead and falling into sinkholes.
So they weren't, it wasn't like a foxhole they were jumping into or fell into. It was clear, so far as they could tell, till they stood on it, like ice.
Yeah.
And when it fell through, broke through.
Yeah, just here they go. Boom, 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 boom. And I suppose Chedorlaomer's army's watching this going, hey, you better take a sweep to the left and go around the beach and get off the beach, because these guys are just disappearing. Whole groups of them, as they're running, are just falling in. Now, we know today, because the Dead Sea level today is where it was in that day, thousands of sinkholes, particularly around the northwest side of the Dead Sea and down along the western slopes, or western side, have thousands of sinkholes.
And there's no tar in them.
There's no tar in them. It's just like dark, almost blackish, slimy mud. And if you are going to go hiking around the Dead Sea, there are signs everywhere today warning of the sinkholes. And they tell you, if you're going to walk in the Dead Sea area, make sure you tell people where you are, have people with you, because if you fall into one of these sinkholes and you're by yourself, chances are you're going to die, because you're going to lose cell phone service. When you're down there 20, 30 feet and you're covered over with this hole, just a little bit of light up there, and here I am. Not only could it collapse more and cover you and suffocate you and kill you, but also it would, your cell phone's not going to work. Yeah. And so they tell people, always be careful because of these sinkholes. So we now know, because of being able to study what happens around the Dead Sea today when it drops to this low level, we know exactly what was happening on the day that the cities of the plain army was defeated by Chedorlaomer, and they were fleeing and falling into these sinkholes, slime pits, as they were opening up due to the weight of the soldiers running over the top of them.
So, slime pits aren't maybe what we think they are in the Bible, but they're real deal. What the Bible describes, you may, but in fact, it's exactly what we know today with the world, with the Dead Sea as it is today, like it was then. It all of a sudden gets clear.
Yes.
It's cool how we can get a better understanding of the Bible based on new information that we get, and in this case, it was the Dead Sea. By the way, how does that story end?
Well, it ends
got a
pretty
couple
well.
minutes, but,
Some of the soldiers fell into, as they were trying to escape, some of them fell into these pits. But one guy at least got away and decided, maybe he saw a couple of these guys go boop, 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 and he went, oh, whoops, I'm not going that way. He takes off up the hill toward Jerusalem, and who's hanging out up there around Jerusalem, Hebron? Abraham. And why is he going to go up there? He's going to go up there because he's going to say, well, not only did we lose the battle, but Lot must have been involved somehow, and he got captured. And so maybe he knows that Lot's uncle is living up here and he's going to go to Abraham and he's going to say, your nephew Lot and maybe some other people, got taken. You need to rescue him if you want.
If you want.
I'm thinking maybe Abraham had a couple of second thoughts about that, but he decided, okay, he would go after him. And so Abraham then went over, talked to the king of Sodom. He went to Sodom, talked to the king of Sodom, reconnoitered the situation, and then took off up the valley. Now, Chedorlaomer had gone back up to the King's Highway. He'd come down the King's Highway, and so he went back to the King's Highway, right up that spur from Tal Hammon that leads up to the King's Highway. He's headed back to Damascus, from which place those mercenary soldiers will be sort of let go, and everybody will go back home, and he will carry all of his booty and loot and all of that back home. And so Abraham now is going to go after him, mainly because of Lot. But he probably is thinking, hey, we can make some money off of this deal. And he's already collected all this tribute and all this copper and all this. Let's go get it. And so not only does he go after him, by the way, he does not go up, really a brilliant military guy. He does not go up the King's Highway because he knows he's going to be spotted by Chedorlaomer's rear guard. And so he goes up the valley road. So he goes up to Tel Dan. He goes up to Dan, and then from the valley in the north, cuts up to the King's Highway and catches Chedorlaomer at Hobah, just north of Damascus. And he defeats him because most of the troops have already gone home. And so he takes the spoils, takes all these spoils, and takes them back to the king of Sodom and says, okay, here are all these carts of stuff. I've got all your stuff. And Chedorlaomer had gotten a lot of stuff. But now Abraham's got it, and he's going to give it, here's your stuff, King Bera, all your stuff. Now King Bera says to Abraham,
King Bera of Sodom.
King Bera of Sodom says, let me pay you off. You've done such a great job. Let me give you all this stuff. Abraham says, interestingly enough, no. Lest anyone, like Melchizedek at Jerusalem that he's hooked up with, lest anyone say that the king of Sodom made Abram rich. This is not going to be a good thing. I don't want any money from you. Just pay my men what they ate, and pay their expenses, and give them what you want, but you're not paying me anything. And so what does he do? King Bera and the king of Sodom and Abraham take off and go to Jerusalem. And I'm sure the whole trip, King Bera is trying to convince Abraham to come to work for him. Because I'm thinking Lot had come to work sort of as a mercenary with King Bera, and it didn't work out so well. Lot failed in protecting the city of Sodom. So he's trying to get Abraham, wow, Abraham, you got a good army, you're a tough guy, I can pay you a whole lot more than Melchizedek can in Jerusalem. He's just a little bitty city up there. I'm this big, massive city down here. We can fix you up. Abraham says, nope, nobody fixing me up. I have a deal. And so he goes up, and what happens? Melchizedek comes out of Jerusalem. He comes down to the King's Valley, probably Kidron Valley, and they offer bread. He brings bread and wine, and they have a little ceremony, and Abraham pays Melchizedek 1/10 of the spoils of war that he has collected. And now, why is he doing this? Because Abraham obviously had an agreement as a mercenary protector, being the front line of defense for Melchizedek, in turn for Abraham being able to run his flocks and herds on the Jerusalem city-state lands. So the agreement went something like this. Melchizedek says to Abram, yes, I need a good frontline defender. You're it, and it works great. And therefore, if you will be my frontline protection, if anybody attacks me, you can then graze your flocks and herds on the city-state lands. But, Melchizedek says to Abraham, and I think this is all very clearly implied, if you beat up on anybody else, I don't care who you beat up on, if you go attack anybody else or get spoils of war, I get 10%. I get 10%. And Abraham says, 10%? I keep 90%? That's good. That's good. And so when Abraham goes off to war and he brings spoils of war, Melchizedek comes out to not demand, he's not being demanding, he comes out to collect the 10% that is specified in their agreement together. Now that's wonderfully picked up in the New Testament because Melchizedek becomes a type of the Messiah, of Christ. Mm-hmm. And of course, the whole idea was Abraham, the lesser, paying the tithe to the greater. Yeah. And there's this whole typology in the book of Hebrews built on that. But the base story is a really simple one. It's Abraham is just paying up what he owes according to his agreement with Melchizedek.
Now, you did read a few things into the biblical text, but that's quite a thought of seeing that story.
And we know how to read that into the text because if we study the Habiru, which sounds a lot like Hebrew. Now, not all Habiru, and these are marauding nomads, marauding mercenary bands of people who hire themselves out, to city-states and other people, or they do their own thing. But they're kind of disenfranchised and they're multi-ethnic, like Abraham's band is, Ephron the Hittite, and you got all these other guys. And so, not every Habiru in the Near East is a Hebrew, but every Hebrew in the Bible would be considered by the city-state folk as Habiru, marauding nomads. And so when we say Abraham the Hebrew, what are we saying? Abraham, who the marauding nomad, the mercenary warlord, if you like, who is quite capable of taking care of business.
Abraham, the mercenary warlord. Well, You heard it here first, but I do like the idea. So thanks for joining us, and we hope that this has been a great episode. Join us again next time, troweling down biblical archaeology for the 21st century.